Ladies and gentlemen, Keir Starmer's socialist government is in turmoil as the Prime Minister is facing his first ministerial resignation. It's about the so-called Grenfell Minister, in case you didn't know what this is.
Keir Starmer's leadership is falling apart before our eyes. Ministers are resigning in protest, secret deals are being exposed, and now his entire team is turning against him. The shocking truth behind his brutal aid cuts and Ukraine betrayal has ignited a full-scale mutiny within Labour, and the fallout is worse than anyone imagined. Is this the beginning of the end for Starmer and his government? Will he be forced to resign as the party crumbles around him? For months, whispers of discontent have been growing inside Labour. MPs have been uneasy, backbenchers have been grumbling, and now, one after another, top ministers are handing in their resignations. But this isn't just about policy disagreements or internal disputes. This is about betrayal at the highest level. It all started with a secret deal, one that Starmer never wanted the public or even his own party to know about. The bombshell revelation: Keir Starmer has been quietly pulling back on aid commitments, slashing vital funds meant for Ukraine. Publicly, he stood firm, claiming to support Ukraine against Russian aggression. But behind closed doors, it's a different story. Leaked documents expose how Starmer's government has been cutting key financial and military assistance, weakening Britain's role in the global response. For many in his party, this was the final straw, and now the fallout is explosive. A top Labour minister, once one of Starmer's closest allies, has walked away, publicly condemning him for what they call a total betrayal of British values. But it doesn't stop there. More ministers are considering resigning, and Starmer is scrambling to contain the damage. Reports suggest emergency meetings are being held in an attempt to stop the bleeding, but the damage may already be done. Behind the scenes, Labour MPs are in chaos. Some are terrified this scandal could cost them the next election. Others see this as the moment to finally break free from Starmer's leadership, launching fresh plots to oust him before it's too late. Sources close to Labour insiders reveal that the rebellion has been brewing for months, but now, with this shocking evidence coming to light, it has reached a boiling point. And the worst part? As the cracks in Starmer's leadership widen, the betrayal runs deeper than anyone could have imagined. The shocking evidence that has triggered this mass exodus didn't just come out of nowhere, it was deliberately leaked by someone inside Labour's inner circle. Someone who had finally had enough of Starmer's double-dealing. This insider, reportedly a high-ranking official, had access to confidential documents proving that Starmer's team had been actively working behind the scenes to scale back aid commitments while presenting a completely different narrative to the public. The documents detail internal discussions where key figures within Labour expressed concerns about how voters would react if they discovered the truth. Instead of standing firm on principles, Starmer's strategy was to quietly reduce financial and military support to Ukraine while maintaining a strong pro-Ukraine stance in speeches and interviews. It was deception at the highest level, and now it's all coming back to haunt him. The impact of this revelation has sent shockwaves through the Labour Party. Ministers who were already questioning Starmer's leadership now see this as the moment to abandon ship. One by one, resignations are rolling in, and the list of departing officials keeps growing. Sources within Westminster suggest that Starmer is furious, holding emergency crisis talks to stop the situation from spiraling out of control. But the problem isn't just those who are leaving, it's the ones who are staying but no longer trust him. MPs are secretly meeting to discuss whether they can continue under his leadership, while whispers of a no-confidence challenge begin to circulate. Some within the party believe that if Starmer doesn't resign voluntarily, he could be pushed out, with internal factions already plotting his downfall. Meanwhile, the public reaction has been swift and brutal. Social media is ablaze with criticism, and opposition parties are wasting no time in capitalizing on the scandal. Conservative MPs are calling it the biggest Labour betrayal in modern history, while even members of Starmer's own party are struggling to defend him. Voters who once saw Starmer as a steady alternative to the chaos of previous years are now questioning whether he can be trusted at all. The timing couldn't be worse. Labour had been riding high in the polls, seemingly on course for a strong election victory. But now, that momentum is in serious jeopardy. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, a new revelation has emerged: suggestions that Starmer's team may have actively suppressed dissent within Labour by pressuring MPs to stay silent about the aid cuts. Insiders claim that those who raised concerns were warned not to speak out, told that any public criticism would be seen as damaging to the party's election prospects. This kind of internal manipulation is exactly what many had feared: a leadership obsessed with control, willing to mislead its own. The scandal is growing by the hour, and Starmer's grip on the Labour Party is slipping faster than anyone expected. As more details emerge, it is becoming clear that this wasn't just a simple case of political mismanagement, it was a deliberate effort to mislead both the public and key figures within Starmer's own party. The documents that surfaced didn't just expose Labour's quiet rollback of aid commitments, they revealed secret meetings where top advisers strategized on how to sell the cuts without triggering a public backlash. Internal emails show clear discussions about the risks of exposure, with some members warning that if the truth came out, it could shatter trust in Starmer's leadership. And now, that very nightmare has become a reality. The backlash inside Labour is turning into an all-out mutiny. A growing number of MPs are breaking their silence, openly criticising Starmer's handling of the scandal. Some are calling his leadership untenable, while others are demanding immediate answers about who knew what and when. Even Labour members who once defended Starmer are beginning to distance themselves, afraid of being dragged down with him. The fear is spreading fast. This isn't just about one leader's mistakes, it's about the party's entire credibility being thrown into question. If Starmer was willing to hide critical policy decisions from his own MPs, what else has he been keeping from them? Meanwhile, inside Starmer's inner circle, panic is setting in. Advisers are scrambling to control the narrative, pushing desperate talking points to justify the aid cuts. But the problem isn't just the policy itself, it's the deception. Starmer spent months assuring both the public and his own party that Labour was fully committed to supporting Ukraine, only for these documents to prove otherwise. This level of hypocrisy is impossible to defend, and those closest to him know it. Crisis meetings are happening behind closed doors, with senior figures weighing whether sticking with Starmer is even worth the risk anymore. Some are already preparing for his downfall, positioning themselves as potential successors should he be forced out. And then came the biggest blow yet. One of Labour's most senior ministers, someone seen as a key part of Starmer's leadership team, has now resigned in protest. This isn't just another backbench MP walking away. This is a heavyweight figure whose departure sends a clear message: Labour is in chaos, and confidence in Starmer is collapsing. Sources say this minister had been privately clashing with Starmer for weeks, frustrated over his handling of aid policy and the party's growing internal divisions. When the scandal broke, they knew they could no longer stand by and watch the deception unfold. Their resignation letter, now circulating across political circles, lays the blame directly at Starmer's feet, accusing him of putting political calculations ahead of principle. As Labour scrambles to contain the damage, the question now is whether this is the beginning of the end for Starmer. The party is facing a crisis unlike anything it has seen in years, and with every passing day, the cracks are getting wider. If more ministers follow suit, Starmer could be left completely isolated, a leader in name only. And the worst part? This might not even be the full extent of the scandal. Insiders are hinting that even more damaging evidence is about to come out, evidence that could make Starmer's position totally unsalvageable. The fallout from this scandal is growing into a full-blown political catastrophe. As the mass exodus from his team continues, it's becoming evident that this isn't just a leadership crisis, it's a moment of reckoning for the entire Labour Party. Ministers are no longer whispering about Starmer's failures behind closed doors, they are publicly breaking ranks, exposing the deep fractures that have been festering within Labour for months. The aid scandal has ignited something far more dangerous than simple political infighting. It has unleashed a rebellion against Starmer's leadership, and the situation is spiraling out of his control. Sources inside Labour are now admitting what many have suspected for weeks: Starmer's inner circle knew about the aid cuts long before the public did, and they actively worked to cover up the full extent of the betrayal. Leaked documents confirm that meetings were held with high-ranking officials, where strategies were drawn up to delay and downplay the impact of the cuts until they could no longer be hidden. Some advisors reportedly even warned Starmer that if the truth got out, his leadership would not survive the backlash. But instead of reversing course, Starmer doubled down, insisting that Labour could weather the storm. Now, with multiple resignations and Labour MPs openly calling for his head, it's clear that Starmer underestimated the political disaster unfolding around him. Behind the scenes, Labour HQ has gone into full damage control mode. Crisis meetings are now an hourly occurrence, as Starmer's remaining loyalists scramble to contain the growing rebellion. A desperate new strategy has emerged, shifting the. Elsewhere, insiders say Starmer's team is trying to pin the scandal on lower-level officials, claiming that the real details of the aid policy were misinterpreted by advisors and that Starmer himself was misled about the full extent of the cuts. But this excuse is falling apart fast. Not only do the leaked emails suggest that Starmer was directly involved in the decision-making, but senior ministers who have now resigned are refuting Labour's spin, insisting that Starmer was in the room when the final decision was made. And here's where things take an even darker turn. Sources are now hinting at even more damning revelations that could destroy what little credibility Starmer has left. Whispers inside Westminster suggest that this aid scandal is just the tip of the iceberg. There are rumours of secret agreements where Starmer may have promised certain international leaders that he would scale back Britain's commitments to Ukraine, all while publicly vowing to support the country against Russian aggression. If this turns out to be true, then Starmer hasn't just misled his own party, he's deceived the entire country. The mere suggestion that Britain's Labour leader could have covertly weakened support for Ukraine at a time when the country is in crisis would be nothing short of a political earthquake. The cracks in Labour's foundation are widening by the hour. Even MPs who have remained loyal to Starmer are now beginning to waver, not necessarily because they oppose the aid cuts, but because they know that Starmer's leadership has become a liability. The general election is looming, and Labour strategists are panicking. If Starmer remains leader, the party could face a devastating collapse at the polls. The concern isn't just about the scandal itself. It's about what this scandal represents: a leader who has lost the trust of his own team, a party that is fracturing under the weight of its own deceptions, and a public that is increasingly skeptical of Labour's promises. Meanwhile, in the corridors of power, another crucial battle is taking shape, the fight over Starmer's successor. If Starmer is forced out, who will replace him? Several key figures within Labour are already manoeuvring behind the scenes, quietly preparing their leadership bids should Starmer fall. Some factions believe the party should pivot toward a more hard-left approach, returning to the socialist principles that defined Jeremy Corbyn's era. Others argue that Labour needs a centrist leader who can repair the party's credibility and prevent a mass voter exodus. Either way, the war over Labour's future has already begun, and the outcome will determine whether the party can survive this crisis or whether it's destined for total electoral disaster. And then comes the biggest question of all: will Keir Starmer even make it through the next few weeks? The pressure on him is unbearable, and it's only getting worse. The resignations have crippled his authority, the scandal has shattered his credibility, and the Labour rebellion is intensifying. But the final blow may come from one last revelation, something so damaging that even Starmer's most devoted allies will have no choice but to abandon him completely. As the walls close in around Keir, the true extent of his crisis is finally coming to light, and it is far worse than anyone initially suspected. What started as a political scandal over foreign aid has morphed into a full-scale collapse of Starmer's leadership. The rebellion within Labour is no longer just a few disgruntled ministers resigning in protest, it is an all-out mutiny, with MPs, party officials, and even once loyal allies now calling for his immediate resignation. The party is tearing itself apart, and with every passing hour, Starmer's grip on power is slipping further away. And now, in a stunning turn of events, the final betrayal has been exposed. Fresh leaks have emerged, revealing secret meetings, hidden agreements, and political deals that completely contradict Starmer's public stance on Ukraine and Britain's foreign commitments. These documents, allegedly provided by insiders within Labour, suggest that Starmer's team deliberately misled the public about Britain's aid strategy, knowing full well that the cuts would have devastating consequences. Even more shocking, It now appears that Starmer was actively engaged in discussions to reduce Britain's military support for Ukraine behind closed doors while at the same time giving public speeches vowing unwavering support for the war-torn nation. The hypocrisy is staggering, and the implications are seismic. The Labour leader is now facing the biggest credibility crisis of his career. His political opponents are circling like vultures, with the Conservative government seizing this moment to utterly destroy his reputation. Tory ministers are already calling for a full parliamentary investigation, demanding that Starmer be forced to answer for his deception. Even within Labour, senior figures are distancing themselves from him, with some now suggesting that if Starmer refuses to step down, the party may have no choice but to remove him. The message is clear: he is no longer fit to lead. Meanwhile, the public reaction has been explosive. What was once quiet frustration over Labour's vague policies has erupted into outright fury, with voters expressing their deep distrust in Starmer's leadership. Polls are already showing a sharp drop in Labour's support, and political analysts are warning that if this crisis is not resolved quickly, Labour's chances of winning the next general election could be obliterated. The opposition was supposed to be in its strongest position in years, poised to take power after more than a decade of Conservative rule. But now, under Starmer's failing leadership, the party is at risk of losing everything. But here's the most damning part: Starmer isn't just losing control of his party, he's losing control of the narrative. No matter how hard his team tries to spin the situation, the truth is now out in the open. Every new revelation further cements the reality that Labour is crumbling from within, and the man at the top is unable to stop the collapse. The once confident Starmer is now appearing visibly shaken in public, struggling to maintain composure as reporters grill him with tough questions about the resignations and his crumbling credibility. Gone is the polished, assured politician who once promised a strong and stable government. In his place stands a leader on the verge of total political ruin. Behind closed doors, Labour's internal war has reached a boiling point. Some senior MPs are already plotting his removal, gathering support for a potential leadership challenge. Others are engaged in last-ditch efforts to contain the damage, desperate to salvage what's left of Labour's credibility before the next election. But the reality is becoming clearer by the day: Starmer's time is running out. The more he clings to power, the more Labour fractures. And as more shocking details emerge about the true depth of his betrayal, it's becoming increasingly likely that he won't survive this crisis. Now, the final devastating blow is about to land. New reports suggest that even more ministers are preparing to resign, with sources inside Labour hinting that at least a dozen MPs are ready to walk away if Starmer does not step down voluntarily. If this happens,